The year was 1995, and Jim Carrey stood at the pinnacle of Hollywood success. Ace Ventura, Pet Detective, The Mask, and Dumb and Dumber had transformed him from a struggling comedian into comedy's golden boy. His elastic face and manic energy had become his trademark, earning him millions at the box office and acclaim from audiences worldwide. But behind the cameras, behind that famous million-dollar smile, a storm was brewing. Sarah Mitchell, name changed, wasn't like the other women Jim had dated in Hollywood. A talented independent filmmaker he met at a small industry gathering. She saw through his carefully constructed facade of constant comedy. "You don't have to perform for me," she told him during their first real conversation, and something in those words had cracked open a door he'd kept sealed for years. Their relationship blossomed away from the paparazzi's prying eyes. While the world saw Carrey as the man who talked through his buttocks in Ace Ventura, Sarah saw the painter who spent hours in his private studio, creating abstract expressions of his inner turmoil. She witnessed the man who could sit in silence for hours, contemplating the nature of identity, a theme that would later become central to his artistic journey. "Comedy was my survival mechanism," Carrey would later confide in his journal. "When you grow up watching your father lose everything, watching your mother pop pills to cope with depression, you learn to be funny. You learn that if you can make people laugh, they might not notice how broken you are inside." The relationship with Sarah coincided with a crucial period in Carrey's career. He was preparing for what would become one of his most challenging roles, the Andy Kaufman biopic, Man on the Moon. The role required him to delve deep into the psyche of another complicated performer, someone who, like himself, used performance as both a shield and a weapon. Sarah encouraged this exploration, pushing him to confront the demons he'd been running from. She would sit with him late into the night, listening as he spoke about his childhood in Canada, about the nights his family spent living in a VW van, about the anger and fear that fueled his desperate need to succeed. But as Carrey dove deeper into Kaufman's character, something began to shift in his relationship with Sarah. The lines between performance and reality started to blur. He would sometimes speak to her in Kaufman's voice, or worse, retreat into complete silence for days. The man who had built his career on being the most visible person in any room began to disappear into himself. The breaking point came during a private screening of his early footage from Man on the Moon. Sarah watched as Carrey disappeared completely into Kaufman's character, and when the lights came up, she saw something in his eyes that terrified her, or rather, she saw nothing at all. The man she had fallen in love with seemed to have vanished. "I don't know who you are anymore," she said that night, her words cutting through the heavy silence of his Bel Air mansion. "I don't think you know either." The truth in her words shook him to his core. His response was to retreat further into his work, pushing himself to extremes that would later become legendary in Hollywood. He stayed in character as Andy Kaufman for months, affecting every relationship in his life, including, fatally, his relationship with Sarah. As 1996 drew to a close, Sarah left a note on his bathroom mirror, written in lipstick, "Find yourself before you lose yourself completely." By the time he read it, she was gone, leaving behind only the echo of a relationship that had forced him to confront the most frightening question of his life. Who was Jim Carrey when he wasn't performing? This breakup would trigger a period of intense self-examination that would change not just his approach to acting, but his entire understanding of identity and performance. But first, he would have to face the darkness that had been lurking behind his smile all along, a darkness that would nearly destroy everything he had built. The story of Jim Carrey and Sarah Mitchell might have remained hidden from the public eye, but its impact would ripple through his career in ways that nobody, not even Carrey himself, could have predicted. And this was just the beginning of a journey that would challenge everything he thought he knew about love, identity, and the price of making the world laugh. The first months of 1997 found Jim Carrey in a spiral that few outside his innermost circle witnessed. The departure of Sarah Mitchell had left a void that even his most manic performances couldn't fill. His Bel Air mansion, once alive with laughter and creative energy, became a labyrinth of empty rooms filled with unfinished paintings, dark, twisted abstracts that seemed to scream from their canvases. The studios were pressuring him to begin promotion for Liar Liar, a film that would cement his status as Hollywood's highest-paid comedian. The irony wasn't lost on him, playing a man forced to tell the truth while he felt increasingly like a fraud in his own skin. During press interviews, he maintained his signature energetic persona, but those who looked closely might have noticed something different in his eyes, a haunting vacancy that hadn't been there before. It was during this period that Carrey began experiencing what he would later describe in private journals as the unraveling. He would spend days locked in his painting studio, creating disturbing self-portraits that showed his famous face fragmenting into dozens of different personas. His agent, worried about his mental state, tried to intervene, but Carrey responded by firing him, the first in a series of professional relationships he would sever that year. The darkness truly began to surface during the filming of The Truman Show. Playing a man who discovers his entire life is a performance struck too close to home. Between takes, Carrey would sit alone, scribbling in his journal. What if Sarah was right? What if there is no real me? Just layers of performance built upon performance until the core is lost. His behavior on set became increasingly erratic. He would sometimes refuse to answer to Jim, insisting that people call him Truman. Other times, he would break character mid-scene and launch into philosophical monologues about the nature of reality and identity. Director Peter Weir later admitted that he considered shutting down production for a few weeks, but the studio pressured them to continue. The breaking point came during a crucial scene where Truman first begins to suspect his reality is fake. After 16 takes, Carrey suddenly stopped in the middle of his performance and turned to face the camera directly. "Sarah," he called out, his voice cracking. "Are you watching this? Is this real enough for you?" The crew watched in uncomfortable silence as one of Hollywood's biggest stars seemed to crumble before their eyes. That night, alone in his trailer, Carrey made a phone call that would change the trajectory of his life. He reached out to Sarah, leaving a voicemail that would later become almost mythical among those who knew the truth. "You were right. I'm lost. But maybe that's where I need to be to find myself again. I'm not calling to get you back. I'm calling to let you go. Because holding on to you means holding on to who I thought I was supposed to be. And that person is killing me." The next day, Carrey disappeared from the set. Production shut down for 3 days while his team searched frantically. They finally found him in a small art gallery in downtown Los Angeles, standing for hours before a Jackson Pollock painting. When his assistant tried to pull him away, he simply said, "Look at it. It's chaos and order at the same time. That's what we all are. Why are we trying so hard to be just one thing?" The incident cost the studio millions, but something had shifted in Carrey. He returned to set with a different energy, more focused, more present. He threw himself into the role of Truman not as an escape, but as a means of exploration. The performance would later earn him a Golden Globe and critical acclaim, but more importantly, it marked the beginning of a transformation. What the public didn't know was that during this period, Carrey had begun seeing a therapist specializing in identity disorders among performers. In their sessions, he started to unravel the complex web of his public persona, his childhood trauma, and the relationship with Sarah that had forced him to confront it all. But as Carrey began to find his footing again, a new challenge emerged. Sarah Mitchell had begun working on a documentary about performers and identity, and rumors circulated that she had hours of intimate footage from their time together. Footage that showed a side of Jim Carrey that the world had never seen, and that he wasn't sure he was ready to reveal. The man who had built an empire on making people laugh now faced a choice: continue hiding behind the mask or embrace the painful truth of his own unraveling. The decision he would make would not only affect his career, but would set in motion a chain of events that would challenge everything Hollywood thought it knew about its favorite funny man. Late 1998 brought with it the kind of autumn Los Angeles rarely sees: gray, rainy, and unusually cold. Jim Carrey sat in his private screening room, watching footage he hadn't seen in nearly 2 years. On the screen, a younger version of himself painted frantically on a massive canvas, his movements almost violent, while Sarah's voice could be heard off camera. "Tell me what you're feeling, Jim." Not thinking, feeling. The footage had arrived that morning in a plain brown envelope with no return address, just a handwritten note. "This is who you were. Who are you now?" The implication was clear: Sarah's documentary was more than just a rumor. What followed was a period that Carrey's inner circle would later call the ghost days. He withdrew from public life completely, canceling appearances and turning down roles that would have earned him millions. His new manager, the third that year, fielded constant calls from concerned studio executives. The man who had commanded $20 million per picture was now being viewed as a liability. But in his self-imposed exile, something unexpected was happening. The private journals he kept during this time, excerpts of which would later become part of a controversial art installation, revealed a mind grappling with fundamental questions of existence. "Every laugh I've ever earned," he wrote, "was a cry for help dressed in a punchline. Sarah saw that. She tried to help me see it too. I wasn't ready then. Maybe I am now." The turning point came through an unlikely source. During a rare venture out of his mansion, Carrey encountered an old street performer he'd known from his early days in Los Angeles. The man was still performing the same comedy routine he'd been doing 20 years ago, but with a serenity Carrey found fascinating. Over coffee in a quiet diner, the street performer shared a perspective that would change everything. "We're all performing, Jim. The trick isn't to stop performing. It's to choose a performance that heals instead of hurts." That conversation sparked something in Carrey. He began to view his crisis not as a breakdown, but as a breakthrough. He reached out to Sarah, not to stop her documentary, but to contribute to it. Their first meeting in nearly 2 years took place in a small art gallery in Venice Beach, neutral territory that acknowledged their shared appreciation for creative expression. What transpired during that meeting remained private, but its effects rippled through both their lives. Sarah agreed to postpone her documentary, not out of fear or coercion, but because she recognized that the story wasn't finished yet. The man she had known and loved was transforming, and the truth she had hoped to capture in her film was still evolving. Carrey's return to public life was gradual but deliberate. He began incorporating his paintings into small, invitation-only exhibitions. The works were nothing like the commercial comedies that had made him famous. They were raw, often disturbing explorations of identity and pain. Yet they attracted attention from serious art critics who saw in them something authentic and compelling. During this period, he also began writing what would become an unconventional memoir, though he refused to call it that. "It's not my story," he told his new literary agent. "It's a story about stories, the ones we tell others and the ones we tell ourselves." The manuscript, filled with abstract drawings and stream-of-consciousness passages, scared most publishers, but it attracted the attention of a small, independent press known for its avant-garde works. But just as Carrey seemed to be finding his footing on this new path, a crisis emerged that threatened to undo everything. A former assistant, bitter from being fired during Carrey's ghost days, approached several tabloids with stories about his behavior during that time. More worryingly, they claimed to have copies of private recordings, conversations between Carrey and Sarah that revealed the full extent of his psychological struggles. The stakes were no longer just personal. Carrey's carefully constructed new identity, built from the ashes of his crisis, was at risk of being reduced to sensational headlines and out-of-context quotes. The very real progress he had made in therapy, the genuine artistic expression he had found, and the delicate new understanding he had reached with Sarah, all of it could be twisted into just another Hollywood scandal. As the tabloids began their feeding frenzy, Carrey received another unmarked envelope. Inside was a USB drive containing a single video file, raw footage from Sarah's abandoned documentary. The clip showed Carrey in his studio, covered in paint, laughing genuinely for what felt like the first time in years. Sarah's voice, warm and clear. "That's it. That's the real you." Now, facing the threat of exposure on all sides, Carrey had to make a decision that would define not just his career, but his very understanding of truth, performance, and identity. The question was no longer about hiding or revealing. It was about owning his story before it owned him. January 2000 arrived with the weight of millennial promises and digital fears. While the world worried about Y2K, Jim Carrey faced his own kind of system crash. The tabloids had begun publishing snippets of the leaked recordings, fragments of private moments taken out of context, twisted into sensational headlines. Carrey's secret breakdown, Comedy King's dark spiral, Star's hidden demons revealed. But something unexpected happened. Instead of hiding or issuing denials through his publicity team, Carrey chose a different path. He called a meeting with Sarah Mitchell, his therapist, and a small group of trusted advisors in his art studio. The walls were covered with new paintings, no longer the dark, twisted pieces from his crisis period, but works of startling clarity and surprising hope. "I've spent my whole life trying to be what everyone else needed me to be," he told them. "The funny man, the movie star, the reliable hitmaker. Even my breakdown was a performance of sorts, the tortured artist, the troubled genius. But maybe the bravest thing I can do is just be." What followed was unprecedented in Hollywood. Carrey decided to take control of his narrative by collaborating with Sarah on a new project, one that would combine elements of her original documentary with his artwork, journals, and current perspective. But unlike typical celebrity confessionals, this wouldn't be an exercise in image rehabilitation. It would be an exploration of identity, performance, and the cost of making the world laugh. The project, titled Sketches of the Self, began with a series of art installations in small galleries across Los Angeles. Each installation featured one of Carrey's paintings paired with video footage from Sarah's documentary and excerpts from his journals. The effect was immersive and unsettling. Visitors moved through spaces that chronicled not just a breakdown, but a breakthrough. In one particularly powerful installation, viewers entered a room where Carrey's famous characters were projected on all four walls: Ace Ventura, The Mask, Lloyd Christmas, while audio from his therapy sessions played overhead. Every character I've ever played is a version of myself I either wanted to be or was afraid I already was. The Hollywood reaction was mixed. Some saw it as career suicide, others as the most compelling performance of his life. But Carrey himself no longer seemed concerned with those opinions. He began giving candid interviews about his journey, speaking openly about his relationship with Sarah and how it had forced him to confront his own artifice. "Sarah didn't break me," he told a stunned Charlie Rose in a landmark interview. "She helped me realize I was already broken. We all are. The trick isn't to hide the cracks, it's to let the light shine through them." The former assistant's tabloid revelations lost their sting in the face of Carrey's radical honesty. How could you scandalize someone who had already laid bare their deepest struggles? The recordings they had threatened to expose became just another layer in the larger story Carrey was telling. But the real test came when a major studio offered him a role that seemed written for this new phase of his life. A comedy drama about a beloved public figure who goes through a personal crisis in full view of the world. The salary was lower than his usual quote, but the script was nuanced, complex, and raw. The old Jim Carrey would have rejected it as too risky. The new Jim Carrey saw it as an opportunity to bridge his past and present. Sarah attended the first script reading, not as an ex-girlfriend or a documentarian, but as someone who understood the journey. She watched as Carrey brought to the character the same authenticity he had finally found in himself. During a break, she pulled him aside and said something that would later become the title of his first published collection of artwork: "You're not performing anymore. You're revealing." The project began attracting attention from serious filmmakers and artists who saw in Carrey's transformation something universal, a story about the masks we wear, the prices we pay for success, and the courage it takes to be truly seen. As filming began on what would become one of his most critically acclaimed roles, Carrey received one final unmarked envelope. Inside was a short note in Sarah's handwriting: "Now this is a story worth telling." Along with it was a USB drive containing all the footage from their time together, given freely, with no conditions or expectations. But just as Carrey seemed to have found a new balance between his public and private selves, an unexpected revelation from his past threatened to pull him back into the darkness. This time, though, he wouldn't face it alone. The revelation came in the form of a letter, yellowed with age, discovered during the renovation of Carrey's childhood home in Canada. It was written by his father, Percy Carrey, during the family's darkest days, when they were living in their VW van, struggling to survive. The letter, never sent, was addressed to a talent agent who had rejected young Jim after his first amateur comedy performance. "My son doesn't just tell jokes," Percy had written. "He lives them. Every gesture, every expression is his way of turning pain into light. One day, you'll regret not seeing what I see in him. But I worry that by the time the world recognizes his gift, he'll have forgotten why he started performing in the first place." The letter shook Carrey to his core. It arrived just as he was preparing for the premiere of his new film and the opening of his largest art exhibition to date, a multimedia experience titled "The Masks We Wear, the Faces We Find." The timing seemed almost cosmic, forcing him to confront the full circle of his journey. He shared the letter with Sarah during a quiet dinner at the same small restaurant where they'd first met. She had just finished editing their collaborative documentary, now evolved into something neither of them had initially envisioned. "Your father saw it all," she said, "the blessing and the curse. He knew that your greatest gift could also be your greatest wound." The documentary, now titled Painted Smiles, The Jim Carrey Story, premiered at Sundance to stunned audiences. It wasn't just about Carrey's breakdown and recovery. It was about the universal human struggle between authenticity and performance, between who we are and who we pretend to be. Scenes of his most famous comedic performances were juxtaposed with intimate moments of vulnerability, creating a portrait of an artist wrestling with his own identity. But the most powerful moment came during the film's final sequence. Carrey returned to his old comedy club in Toronto, where he had performed as a teenager. Instead of doing his usual routine, he sat on a stool and began painting on a small canvas while talking about his father, about Sarah, about the masks we wear and the price we pay for wearing them too long. As he painted, he told the story of his father's letter, his voice cracking with emotion. "My dad saw that comedy wasn't just what I did, it was how I survived. But survival isn't enough. At some point, you have to learn to live." The painting he created that night, a self-portrait showing multiple versions of his face merging into one authentic expression, would later become the signature piece of his art collection. Critics called it a visual autobiography in a single image. His new film released shortly after, showing a side of Carrey that audiences had never seen before. He played a character close to his real experience, a famous performer discovering that his greatest role had been the one he played in real life. The performance was subtle, nuanced, and devastatingly honest. The Academy took notice, and for the first time in his career, Carrey found himself nominated not for making people laugh, but for making them think. Sarah's documentary aired on HBO the same week, creating a cultural moment that sparked discussions about authenticity in the age of performance, about mental health in Hollywood, and about the courage it takes to reinvent oneself in the public eye. During the Oscar ceremony, Carrey walked the red carpet with both Sarah and his father's letter in his pocket. In a quiet moment before the show, he added his own words to his father's letter. "Dad, you were right. The world finally sees what you saw. But more importantly, I see it too." The relationship between Jim and Sarah had evolved into something neither of them had expected, a creative partnership built on mutual understanding and shared purpose. They continued to collaborate on projects that blended art, performance, and raw honesty, creating spaces for others to explore their own authentic selves. Carrey's journey from comedy superstar to authentic artist became a template for others in Hollywood struggling with their own masks. His art gallery became a space for performers to explore their creativity beyond their public personas. His production company began focusing on projects that challenged the boundaries between performance and reality. But perhaps the most significant change was in Carrey himself. The manic energy that had once seemed like his defining characteristic gave way to his centered presence. He still made people laugh, but now it came from a place of joy rather than necessity. His performances, whether on screen or canvas, carried the weight of hard-won truth. In his acceptance speech at the Academy Awards, Carrey surprised everyone by not telling a single joke. Instead, he pulled out his father's letter and read it aloud, adding his own final lines. "To everyone wearing a mask, I see you. To everyone afraid to take it off, I understand. And to everyone brave enough to show their true face to the world, thank you for showing me it was possible." The man who had built his career on being everyone except himself had finally found his most powerful role, being Jim Carrey, in all his complicated, authentic glory. His journey from mask to meaning became more than just a Hollywood story. It became a testament to the power of facing oneself, of turning pain into art, and of finding the courage to be real in a world of performances. As he left the stage that night, Oscar in hand, he caught Sarah's eye in the audience. They shared a smile, not the massive, performative grin that had made him famous, but something smaller, realer, and infinitely more valuable, a genuine moment between two people who had helped each other find their truth.
Tell us in the comments what part of this story impressed you the most. If you liked it, please like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss the next videos. See you in the world of incredible events.